Subscribe to The Crime Desk now for exclusive members-only trial episodes and much more. Just head over to thecrimedesk.com now. That's thecrimedesk.com.
The Crime Desk. Arresting podcasts.
Welcome to the Trial Podcast, The Inquiry. I'm Caroline Cheetham.
And I'm Liz Hull.
We'll be back in a second.
I make it absolutely clear that it's not for me, as chair of this public
The decision to move Letby to day shifts raises serious questions which we will be investigating. Was there a cover-up? If so, why?
I would pray for God to save her. He did. He saved her.
The convictions stand.
But the devil found her.
In August 2023, a neonatal nurse called Lucy Letby was convicted of killing and harming 13 babies in her care. She was sentenced to 14 life terms and declared one of the country's most prolific serial killers. A year later, she was convicted of attempting to kill another baby and given another life sentence.
All this happened in the Countess of Chester Hospital over the course of a year from 2015 to 2016. But what went wrong? Who knew what and when? How was a nurse able to kill and hurt babies on a ward under the noses of her colleagues?
The Thirlwall inquiry is now...
This episode is brought to you by Lifelock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
May 23rd, 1862. The soldiers of the 1st Maryland Infantry Regiment are on the lines, both of them. Though the blue and gray uniforms of the Confederacy and Union divide these men, they are all Marylanders, neighbors, colleagues, even brothers, fighting it out in a battle that perfectly captures the most poignant reality of a nation at war with itself. Join me, Don Wildman, on American History Hit as we return to the battlefields of the Civil War. Why did this war begin? How was it fought? And how did it all pan out? American History Hit, a podcast from History Hit. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Now underway in Liverpool and will attempt to answer these questions and more. We'll be there covering events every day. Well, as promised, we said we'd be back when we had something to bring you, and we've just got a bit of an update today because Lucy Letby's new barrister, Mark McDonald, has just hand-delivered his documents to the Criminal Cases Review Commission to kickstart her appeal. Now, the CCRC, as it's known, doesn't actually usually insist on documents being hand-delivered or of trying to hold a planned press conference on the steps of its offices in Birmingham either. But that's what happened today. And so, once again, Lucy Letby and her team are being accused of orchestrating an insensitive publicity stunt rather than simply allowing the legal process to do its job.
Yeah, Caroline, so I'm here in Birmingham outside the CCRC, and we're going to bring you the substance of that evidence that Mark McDonald presented here today and the unprecedented response from Cheshire Police. Welcome to episode 30. Over to the CCRC.
So welcome back. We said we'd be back if we needed to be. The last time we were here, Liz and I were talking about this case. We were bringing you the words of some of the families who told the Thirlwall inquiry how devastated they've been by the behaviour of Lucy Letby's legal team. They said press conferences and public discussions of their babies without warning was insensitive. And they said it was Lucy Letby's way of controlling the narrative around this case. Here's a quick reminder of what their barrister, Richard Baker, said to the inquiry a couple of weeks ago.
From the moment that she faced accusations at the Countess of Chester Hospital, Lucy Letby cynically tried to change the narrative away from the suspicions that were levelled against her by pleading for her own victimhood and seeking to recruit others to support her. The family see nothing different. in the approach taken in response to appeals, nothing different in a decision to hold a press conference just before Christmas, and nothing different in decisions to hold press conferences during pauses in this inquiry.
So today, I suspect they'll be doubling down on that view, Liz, because Mark McDonald has now made his next move.
Yep, Caroline, we always knew that he was going to supply this information to the CCRC and details of the evidence which he says casts doubt on Lucy Letby's convictions. And he did that today at around 12 p.m. Now, he has a PR firm working pro bono for him, and so on Wednesday, the media was sent an invite to cover this moment. They said Mr. McDonald would be delivering the expert reports and taking questions outside the CCRC's office in central Birmingham. And as it turned out, only a handful of reporters and cameramen turned up, but I was one of them. And we've asked Mark McDonald to come on the podcast a few times now, and he always very politely says no. But I wanted to ask him why he can't allow the legal process to take its course, to trust that his evidence is enough to convince the CCRC to question those convictions, without this kind of media circus that he and everyone else knows is causing so much grief to the families. And in the end, he did have a decent chat with me about all of this, which we're going to bring you shortly.
Yeah, we will come to all of that shortly because you did have a good chat with him today, which was brilliant, really. But first of all, we did want to focus on the substance of this evidence because that's what's really important in terms of, what happens next. So there are two key documents which have been compiled by Mark McDonald's team, which effectively comprises of 24 different experts from across the world. The first report is almost 700 pages and it concludes that 17 babies at the centre of this case were not murdered or deliberately harmed. These experts say the babies died from natural causes or because of poor hospital care. Now, we've heard that before. There's a bit more detail that we come to a little bit later, but there's also a second report. Now, this is 86 pages long and it focuses on the two insulin attacks. Some of it's quite complicated, it's quite scientific, and it's quite medical. So we're going to try not to confuse you because we don't understand all of the science of this either, despite reading all of this over the past 24 hours. But let's just start with what we do know about this second report into the insulin. So we know that there were two babies, baby F and baby L, who were poisoned with insulin, and Lucy Letby was convicted of attempting to murder them. And this is one of the key planks of Mark McDonald's evidence. He says his experts, and these include two consultant neonatologists, a retired professor in forensic toxicology, and a paediatric endocrinologist, have cast significant doubt on the convictions. And essentially, they are saying the babies were never poisoned with insulin. So, Liz, just start off with a few of the reasons that he's given for this.
Yeah, okay, so just bear with me because it is, like you said, Caroline, a little bit complicated. But the first thing these experts claim is that the laboratory in Liverpool, which you'll remember is where doctors at the Countess sent the baby's blood tests to be screened, if you like, he said those blood tests that were carried out didn't meet acceptable forensic standards. Now, specifically what they mean by that is that the jury at the original trial, they say, were misled because they were told the tests were specific for the identification of insulin only, and that it could be relied upon. Now, the experts now say this was wrong. They claim the jury was not told that there's a margin for error in the tests, and also they say no evidence was presented by an expert about quality control of that test. They're also saying that there was no supplementary test carried out either by the lab in Liverpool or by another independent lab to confirm the test results.
Which, of course, we know the reason for that's clear because nobody at the time suspected anyone was poisoning the babies. And in fact, we know this was a failing, that the doctors at the hospital failed to see the significance of those results when they were returned. So that's not particularly unusual that the other test wasn't carried out almost to verify, I suppose.
Yeah, but the experts are also saying that they found what they call convincing new evidence that the test could give falsely high insulin results if certain antibodies are present in the baby's blood. They say these antibodies can be transferred from mother to baby during pregnancy, causing high levels of insulin that leads to low blood sugar once the child is born. And in addition to this, Mr. McDonald said his experts have found alternative medical explanations for why the blood sugar results for both babies were low. For baby F, they say he'd developed sepsis and he wasn't getting enough extra glucose for several hours because of problems with his drip. And both babies also had restricted growth in the womb. They also claim that the treatment of their low blood sugar was also mismanaged by the doctors at the hospital.
Now, you might remember that a man called Peter Hindmarsh gave evidence on this at the trial. Now, he's a consultant and a specialist in childhood diabetes at Great Ormond Street Hospital, and he's also an emeritus professor at University College London. Now, he said during the trial that the high insulin levels of baby F and baby L, coupled with low rates of something called C-peptide, which is basically released when the body produces insulin naturally, prove that they were poisoned by the insulin because it had to have been given by an external source. But these new experts disagree with this as well. They're saying that baby F's and baby L's insulin and C-peptide levels were actually within the normal range and typical for premature babies.
So, effectively, this second report outlines a number of reasons Mark McDonald says the insulin tests should not have been relied upon and were interpreted incorrectly. Of course, we don't know the substance of any of this as it's not been tested, and that's what the CCRC will now have to start to work through. And we should just also remind people listening, Caroline, that it was never disputed in the trial that these babies had been poisoned with insulin. Lucy Letby herself admitted they had been poisoned after hearing the evidence from Professor Hindmarsh, but she just said that she wasn't responsible.
Yeah, so that's a bit more of the detail about the insulin findings. Now, Mark McDonald's also handed in another much larger report that we talked about, and that refers to all 17 babies whose cases featured at the trial. Now, we were given a bit of a preview of 7 of those cases at the first press conference in February. So essentially what happened today in this bigger report was the other 10 babies were added, and all of them have been rolled up into one big report. But effectively, what Mark McDonald and his team are saying to the CCRC with 2 reports now is these babies died or collapsed because of natural causes or because the treatment they received in the hospital was not good enough. So they're saying all of it was down effectively to natural causes and not down to Lucy Letby. Now we'll take a quick break there. Hi everyone, Caroline and Liz here. A quick one to let you know some exciting news. We get such great feedback from all of our listeners all the time, and we so love hearing from you.
Everyone's been so invested in all the cases we've covered so far. And of course, we're going to keep on bringing you more trials from across the UK and beyond on the usual feed.
But we get so many requests to cover even more cases or to answer questions about the trials that we're covering. So that's what we're going to do, which is what's so exciting.
We're launching the Trial Plus, which will be for members only.
And what the Trial Plus will be doing is bringing you some of the content that we can't always bring you on the trial.
We'll be looking at other significant cases from across the world, and we'll also be bringing you more in-depth reporting of the trials we've been covering on the main feed.
Coming up in the first couple of weeks, we're going to be chatting about celebrity cases and what happened when celebs find themselves in court. But to kick it off, we've got a special series about the Lucy Letby case.
We're not going to tell you much more about that here, but it's well worth subscribing if you've been following that one.
These episodes are going to be exclusive to the Trial Plus members only. So if you're listening to the trial now, just scroll up and hit the subscribe button or visit thecrimedesk.com. We'd love you to join us. Okay, so we've been over some of the evidence in Mark McDonald's report, just handed over to the CCRC. So let's come to your chat with him, Liz. Sent you off to Birmingham this morning because he said no to coming on the podcast again yesterday when we asked him. So we dispatched you to Birmingham just to see if you could get a couple of words.
Yeah, so here I am. And as you said, Mark McDonald until today hasn't been very willing to come onto the podcast, but we've had loads of questions that we wanted to ask him. So I managed to grab him after he'd handed in those documents, and this is the first part of what he had to say. So, Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
you know that the first question that the CCRC and the Court of Appeal will ask you is, why did Lucy Letby not call this evidence in her defence at a trial? So what do you say to that?
It's a completely proper question. As you know, I was instructed afterwards, I was not the defence team at trial. What I do know is that you can't just simply go expert shopping. You can't just go and find another doctor that comes up with a different opinion. That is not what I've done. I've gone to the best in the realm.
That's not what the families say you've done, though.
No, let me finish answering the question. And come back to you. I'm not going to answer your question. I've gone to the people that wrote the book, the people that wrote the papers, the people. This is the biggest review of neonatology in the criminal justice system in this country ever completed, ever done. This blows the case out of the water. Now, you had a second follow-up question. What was that?
So I was going to say, have you seen those defence reports then? And what you're saying is that this evidence is different to what's in those defence reports?
This evidence here, it completely demolishes everything that was called at trial. Completely.
And the evidence that wasn't called at trial is what I'm talking about.
It completely demolishes. This is a completely fresh and new approach. So the answer to your question is yes. And this is something bigger and different.
And you know from what the family said at the end of the Thirlwall inquiry a couple of weeks ago.
Not what the family said, what the lawyers said. Let's get it right.
They represent the families.
Yeah, but it's not. You've got to get it right, Liz.
Okay.
Right? Don't misinterpret what.
Although there was evidence directly from mothers, like the mother of baby C.
And that had to be corrected in the Times because they got the Times wrong.
Yeah, but in the written submissions.
In the written submissions by the lawyers.
Yes.
Yes, not by the family.
She was quoted, though, in the written submissions by the lawyers.
Listen, what you're trying to get at is, do I have empathy for what's going on?
No, what I'm asking you is...
Well, let me answer that question.
Okay.
Do I have empathy? And of course I have empathy. These families have been through hell and back. I have said if they want to look at these reports, then they can look at them. Because what I'm after is the truth. That's what I'm doing. And that's what these reports are.
They say that
they were able to engage with it. And another thing, because I noticed yesterday you got a statement from the lead officer in the case. Why doesn't he just simply say, can we see these reports? Not dismiss them out of hand without looking at them. And that's what I'd expect a senior police officer to do.
One more question then.
Of course.
Those families say that there's a due legal process that's followed and that you could, put this application in, which you've done. But why did you need to hand deliver it? They say you're just full of publicity stunts.
Because you ran the blog continuously and your podcast all the way through the trial. When it comes to media, you've been out there at the front of the media, Liz. I know that. And you have...
That's my job, though.
And you had one narrative and you captured that narrative really well and you did it excellently. I put together a counter narrative, a narrative that I say is actually the truth.
So what he says there, Liz, is that he hasn't gone expert shopping because, of course, we know that that's not allowed. And the Court of Appeal would look on that very dimly because you can't sort of come out of one trial and say, actually, I didn't like what my guy did on that one, so I'm going to try another expert. That's not the way it works. But what he's saying is his experts are different. They're the best in the world. And they're looking at the case in a totally different way, which is why he says this is new. I heard you ask him there, obviously, about why he has to play all of this out in public and the impact that it has on the families, which we know is clear. And whatever he says to you in that answer, the lawyers at Thirlwall do speak for their clients. There's no question about that. So I think that's taken as absolutely read. And he doesn't say why he continues to play this out in public, which is what, of course, the families and many, many legal experts are calling on him to do, to sort of go through the formal route, not to play this out in press conference situations. But what he does mention there at the end of your chat, Liz, was that Cheshire Police have now responded to his latest update, haven't they?
Yeah, so up until now, like you said, Caroline, Cheshire Police haven't responded to any of the press conferences that Mark McDonald and his team have held. But yesterday, in quite an unprecedented intervention, really, they issued a statement. Now, this statement came from Detective Superintendent Paul Hughes, who is the senior police officer leading this investigation. And he called the criticisms of the trial process ill-informed and based only on partial knowledge of the facts of the case. He said Lucy Letby's case has been rigorously and fairly tested through 2 juries and by 2 sets of appeal court judges. He also said the investigation was running for 6 years, and he called it an investigation like no other in scope, complexity and magnitude, with around 70 officers involved full-time.
Yeah, he also said there were multiple medical experts specialising in areas of paediatric radiology, paediatric pathology, haematology, paediatric neurology, and paediatric endocrinology, and of course, 2 main medical experts who were both consultant paediatricians. And he said they were all enlisted to ensure the investigation was as thorough as possible. And he also said that the police hadn't been willing so far to be drawn into the public debate because they're respectful of the judicial process, which, of course, has found Lucy Letby guilty in 2 separate trials. And, of course, they're mindful of the families who they say are at the very heart of all of this. He does say, though, Paul Hughes, that the police will do everything they can to support the CCRC and to answer any questions that may arise. So that just gives you a bit of clarity on what Mark McDonald meant there in terms of what Cheshire Police had now said. Back then, Liz, to your chat with him, again, you asked him a couple of times really why the expert medical evidence hadn't been called at the original trial. And here's what he had to say.
I wasn't the defence team at the initial trial. I took over after. I took over in September this year. And this is what I have put together with the international experts and all the expert reports. And now I'm relying upon that to go before the season.
At some point, you will have to answer that question, though.
Of course I will.
But not today.
Well, it's not that I'm not answering it today. I think I did answer it, actually, Liz, because I said the difference is between not going expert shopping and finding the best in the world, which is what I've done. That is the answer to the question. You see, you're right from the point of view that, you know, there wasn't any experts, we now know, no experts called at the trial for the defence. I've got numerous experts now that have come forward after the trial. It now has to be properly assessed and seen.
So can you confirm she hasn't waived legal privilege, though? So you haven't seen because you haven't seen these defence reports?
I haven't. When you say waiving legal privilege, you know what legal privilege
is.
Yeah. And you know what waiving legal privilege is. No client waives legal privilege.
She has to waive legal privilege so Mr. Myers can...
You don't know much about. But that's fine. But the answer to your question is, of course she hasn't waived it.
So just to break that down, Liz, first of all, you do know exactly what legal privilege is, as do most of our audience by now, because we've had lots of people explain it to us. So I'll just list them for you if you can't remember. Defence barrister Tim Owen's been on the podcast. He chatted to us in episode 1 of this series about this very issue. Please do go back and have a listen because that was really interesting. Ken McDonald, no relation to Mark McDonald, I hasten to add. He's the former Director of Public Prosecutions. He's also been on to explain how important it's going to be in this whole process in terms of Lucy Letby and her appeal. As has Mary Pryor, KC, another barrister, and of course the wonderful legal commentator Joshua Rosenberg. They've all been on to the podcast to explain some of these legal issues. But Liz, just to prove that you do know what legal privilege is and why your question wasn't really bizarre, do explain it.
Yeah, so essentially what Tim Owen told us is that everything that takes place between a client and their lawyer or barrister is privileged, which means it's confidential. So that's why Ben Myers KC, who was Lucy Letby's original barrister, still can't say anything about her case. He isn't allowed to divulge what took place in his conversations with her or why they decided on the defence strategy that played out in court. Tim Owen said Ben Myers can't talk about or explain, for example, why he didn't call any defence experts and instead just relied on her to give evidence in the witness box and the fact that he only called a plumber in her defence. crucially, he can't even answer questions asked by Mark McDonald unless Lucy Letby waives that privilege to free him. And Tim Owen said that one reason that a defendant might be concerned about waiving privilege is that it might reveal information that's not helpful or even harmful to their case. But he did point out that it's very, very difficult to win an appeal with a new legal team where you're making criticisms or there are issues about the way the trial was conducted without waiving privilege, because the Court of Appeal want to know. So that's why I was so keen to ask Mark McDonald about it.
And crucially, he did confirm, I think for the first time, Liz, that Lucy Letby hasn't waived legal privilege, which, as you've just explained so eloquently, means Ben Myers can't speak to him, can't speak to Mark McDonald, and he can't explain why there were no expert defence witnesses called at the original trial. And that is fundamental to the Court of Appeal process. So the CCRC now have the evidence. They have the bundle of documents that Mark McDonald has delivered today. It is a significant moment, which is why we brought you a special extra episode. We'll see what happens, and if there's any more to bring you, we, of course, will. Finally, a couple of things to mention before we finish. Firstly, tomorrow on The Trial Plus, we've got a special 2-part mini-series on celebrity trials. We've teamed up with the guys in the States and with some amazing special guests to chat through how and why celebrities find themselves in court. Of course, we'll be chatting about Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, which is an argument which may well find its way into a courtroom next year, but we'll also be looking at some of the biggest cases of the past as well. So if you'd like to listen to that and to the other series that are sitting on The Trial Plus, please do subscribe by going to thecrimedesk.com, or you can hit the subscribe button if you're listening to this on Apple or Spotify. And definitely, finally, we'd also love to know what you enjoy about the content that we're bringing you so we can make it even better. So we're running a super short survey to find out a bit more about you. It takes 2 minutes to fill in and will be really valuable to what we do. The link is in the show notes.
In the meantime, you can follow us on TikTok at Daily Mail Crime, or you can email us thetrial@mailmetromedia.co.uk.
You can leave a comment on Spotify or send us a voice note on WhatsApp on 07796 657 512. Start your message with the word trial. We'll be answering your questions here on The Trial Plus.
See you then.